Welcome to this week's edition of Rugby Unfiltered. I'm your host, Jan de Koning, and with me, as always, Eugene Eloff.
Hi, Jan. Yes, it's great to be back. And what a great weekend of rugby. A lot of surprises, especially with the Six Nations. And we'll talk about that now. But I think Wales are busy getting back to their normal self-belief as a team. That was a good win against Italy. And then, of course, Ireland just too strong for Scotland. But Jan, the game England-France was one of the best matches I've seen in a long time, with France clipping it right at the end with a kick. And you know what? We've got a South African there working with their kickers for the past 3 years, Flock Sillier. And I think for you to chat with him will be great. But I just have to give a short introduction about Flock. So Flock was a fly-off. He was a great fly-off. He played at Western Province, was at the Bulls, was a Bulls kicking coach. But in 2004, I decided with the junior box that we need to have a kicking camp. Now, Flock is not then yet really started with his kicking programs. So we did a kicking camp with all the kickers, Jano Vermaak and a few guys. I still remember it was in Vereniging of all places, there at that casino. And we did 3 days of kicking, and day 4, about all the kickers had groin problems and so on. But what a great guy, and what great influence he had on the kickers.
Eugene, did he play for you as well?
No, I never coached him, but through all the years we've been good friends. But when we played against him, we knew that he was a factor because as a fly-off, he could attack, he could break, he could kick. So yeah, he was the whole package, old Flocky.
Yeah. Without much ado, I mean, we're going to speak a lot of Six Nations now, and Flocky will probably give us better insight than me and you can put together. But I think, everybody is talking about the Six Nations, and the one thing I will ask Flocky is about the defences. Everybody's talking about all the tries and stuff. But I think there's a situation around defences. Maybe Flocky can explain to us why they've moved so dramatically in the direction of attack. So let's chat to Flocky and see what he has to say. Flock Sillier, esteemed kicking coach of the French rugby team. Thank you for joining us on Rugby Unfiltered. It's such a pleasure and an honor to have such an esteemed guest as yourself.
Thanks, Jan. Nice for having me on your show, and looking forward to the chat today.
Yeah. Flock, let's start with what a lot of people might or might not know. But Flock Sillier, the young lad, where the rugby bug started, or where it was all, where Flock comes from, and then the journey you had to eventually arrive in France.
Yeah, it's quite a long journey. I just the other day said to one of the guys, I've been coaching professional rugby now for 26 years, and then you're not talking about your playing days and being coaching at the club rugby. Funny enough, when I was coaching, I was playing for Province, and then the last 2 years when Louis Koen was coming through for Province, then the Cheetahs signed me, Gijsie Pienaar signed me, and then I go to the Cheetahs to play there. And in my first year, I get my knee injured, so I can't play rugby, I can't continue. And then I get involved with Pote Iman at the police rugby club, playing in the club rugby championships in the Free State against Shamlas and Iru was, and Free State Collegians and all those old clubs. And then in that same year, when I became a coach of Pote, we won the Free State Club Champs. And we went to the club terms, and then in that second year, we're coaching Shamlas together, me and Pote. And in that year, then Ian Swartz, who's now with Sarfa, was the Bulls. Then he approached me and said that Heineke Meyer is looking for a kicking coach. That is his dream, and that is his philosophy. And then I went for an interview, and then Heineke said, I want you to do A, B, and C for me. And we first signed a contract for 6 months. And the 6 months became a year, and then a year became 3 years. And eventually you end up 10 years at the Bulls, which I think was still the golden years of the Bulls rugby. 3 Super Rugby titles, 3 Currie Cups. So yeah, and coaching a phenomenal Bulls Super Rugby team. And yeah, from there I went to the Stormers for 2 years. And from the Stormers, I always wanted to do consulting work on my own. So for 4 years, I do a lot of consulting work on my own in France and in Japan. And then me and Fabian rode crosses. And then he said, at that year, he was coaching at Toulon, where Brian Abana, Bakkies and everybody was playing in previous years, and Joe van Niekerk and all those guys. And he said I must come and do some work for him, and I went over. And again, the 2 weeks became 6 months, became 2 years that I've been doing a lot of work for Fabian at Toulon. And then the 2019 World Cup in Japan, he said to me, listen, I've been appointed as a national coach for France, and I really want you to be on board with me on the coaching staff. Are you interested or not? And then obviously it's a no-brainer not to get involved on the highest level in Test rugby. So yes, now it's 7 years later, and still with the French team and enjoying it.
Look, it's an amazing, I mean, I know your journey pretty well, but it's an amazing journey. I mean, here we have the Springbok fly-off, and you coached the Springbok fly-off, the famous Morné Steyn, for many years, and you had a big hand in you, as you said, the 3 Super Rugby titles and Currie Cup titles, and then we know about his exploits in the 2009 British Irish Lions series. But now you're coaching against the Springboks for a French team that just won the Six Nations. So I think start off, I want to touch on this point. Thomas Ramos, talk us through that final kick. I mean, what makes him, I mean, we all know, and we've seen players like Andre Pollard, and we've seen Morné Steyn, and there's lots of players who are so calm. What makes Thomas Ramos so calm and so accurate?
The other day, I said I mentioned it to my family. I said, there's one word that if you're an international kicker, there's one word that you need to handle. That's pressure. If you can handle pressure as a kicker, then you can be an international kicker. For me, there's like 4 or 5 guys that I think that can do that. As you said, you mentioned Morné Steyn. He proved it over the years. Thomas Ramos for sure. And for me, in the old days, it was Johnny Wilkinson and Daniel Carter. Was for me, and of course Andre Pollard. That's the 5 guys that I said is the top 5 kickers that could handle pressure. That if you give him the ball and say, listen, we need the extra 2 points, or we need the 3 points to win the test match, not a game, a test match, because there's so much more pressure playing test rugby than playing in the URC or top 14 or whatever. Yes, it is pressure, but test rugby is just so many levels up. To pressure, because the margin in test rugby is 1 or 2 points here and there, and that's a 5 kicks. And for me, the one word, pressure. If you can handle pressure, and I always said you must make pressure your friend and not your enemy. If you get the ball and pressure not getting to you, and you think about the outcome, what happened if I miss this kick, then obviously you will miss a kick. But if pressure is part of your system, is part of your DNA, you don't feel the pressure. You actually embrace the moment. If you can embrace a moment like Andre Pollard was doing in 2019 with that vital kick against Wales, I mean, that was unbelievable pressure. Carter did it in the past. Johnny Wilkinson did winning World Cup. And now Ramos and Morné Steyn and British Lions. If you can embrace the moment and you can make that pressure part of your, as a friend, as part of your DNA, then you'll be a world-class kicker.
You talk about pressure. I think the Six Nations have been described as a sporting theatre of high drama. If we just think of that final game, France-England, you know, then England's on top, then France is on top, and we went through the whole stages. And then that last play, I mean, the people can debate the penalty as much as they like. The fact is, he was given a penalty. Do you say anything to him at that stage, or just leave him to do his own thing?
I learned over the years that in that moment, you just silence all the noises. He's been trained to. He's like a sniper. It's actually a stupid example, but it's a good example of me. It's like a sniper. If you have to go and do a job, you won't sit there next to him and say, "Listen, you need to make the skill." You know, he's been trained to do that under pressure for many, many, many years, in many moments, in many situations. And same for a Ramos and a guy. You don't have to go and say 1 or 2 words in his ear, say, listen, you need to make this kick, or you know how important this kick is, or whatever. He's been trying to do that in a week, and we've been doing a lot of pressure situations in the game where I will put the ball down and say, listen, this is for the win. But what I add on that is, I said, listen, you only have 6 seconds now, or only have 8 seconds. So I take a lot of time away so that you actually immediately need to put the ball down, immediately make the kick within the 10 seconds. So I make it a bit unrealistic, but in a way, I try and put him as much pressure to get to a game situation. So that's why I said, if you train him well in a week and you prepare him for situations like that, once you get into a situation like on Saturday night, I mean, that it's a second nature. He's been doing that in a week, and then obviously, if you can handle that pressure, it's just a win-win combination then.
Well, we know the outcome now. Another famous win, French Six Nations champions. Flocky, but let's talk about the tournament in general. I mean, all the ups and downs. Speak to us about the French campaign, and perhaps also that loss to Scotland, because that put, especially that last round, it put France under a lot of pressure.
Yes, Jan. I think in the beginning of January, when we get together as a coaching and a management team, it was mentioned that it happened 20 years ago that France went back to back, and it haven't been done in the past 20 years. And there was a lot of lows where France was ending third. A lot of times France was in a wooden spoon, and then everybody talking about the more consistent team French are now under Fabien Galtier, which is true. But again, it was an in-house decision. Said, listen, we have a really good opportunity to go back to back, because the Six Nations, one year you play 3 home games and 2 away games, and the next year you will play 3 away games and 2 home games. And we said, listen, England is one of the favorites. Ireland is one of the favorites. We're playing them at home. Not you've been guaranteed to win, but at least you played at home. And we said, listen, it's really a good opportunity for us to go back to back. And we need a good start against Ireland, which we did. And everything goes really well. And I think, in a way, the game against Scotland on that day, I think we play against a Scotland team, which I think, even when they should, on that type of level that they was playing on that day, they would even put the All Blacks or the Springboks under massive pressure. And that same Scotland team, I think they lost with 1 or 2 points against All Blacks last year, whatever. So they really outplayed on the day. They were just brilliant, Jan. They was absolutely brilliant. Their speed of the game, the tempo they was playing, their skill, the execution of their skill in the passing. Finn Russell was good. I mean, Kia Tupou and Hugh Jones was actually unbelievable. So they really play a good rugby, and they just took the whole game and all the momentum they took away of us. We did well to come back and score that 5 tries to get that bonus point, which was absolutely brilliant. And then obviously the last game, I always say, if you play against a team that has nothing to lose, because the pressure was on us, we're playing at home, we can go back to back. There's a lot of money involved for the federation. You're playing in front of 80,000 people, a lot of pressure. Here comes England. Lost 3 games in a row, been took out by the media. Nobody give them a chance. So then that type of team is a very dangerous team. And then they can play a bit with more freedom as well. And on the night, England play, I think they play really some good rugby. They play a bit different. They play with more ball in hand than the previous 3 or 4 games, but they put us under a lot of pressure. We've just been lucky to get the ball back and to play and get a penalty. But again, I think it was one of the best Six Nations in the last couple of years, just by Italy's been better. Italy beating England. Italy nearly lost with 4 or 5 points against Ireland. And Wales did get their first win as well. So I think it was really one of the best Six Nations by far for me this year.
You talked about the Six Nations being the best. There was a lot of talk about it because of the number of tries were scored. And I know you're a kicking coach, but I mean, you're obviously intentionally involved in this. To me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems like defense was optional. And I'll explain this. I mean, this year, 2026, 111 tries were scored, the most ever in the Six Nations. But then you compare it to last year, which was 108, which is pretty close. But if you go back 5 years, so if you go back to 2022, only 73 tries were scored. But now you reverse it and you look at the defense stats, the missed tackles In 2022, while only 73 tries were scored, there was only 475 missed tackles. That's less than 100 missed tackles per team. The last 2 years, the number of missed tackles have gone up significantly. To last year it was 679, and this year 742 missed tackles. So the fact that there's more tries scored almost seems to suggest, and borne out by the defense stats, which suggest that defense has become optional. Am I wrong?
I think, Jan, you're not wrong. I think you can look at it in many ways. I think the first way I can look at it is, I think the tech, all the teams that tech becomes better. The players are more skillful. There's a more of a variety where they play, where you call it the backdoor, and it's so difficult for teams. Once teams play backdoor in behind the players, it's very difficult to use line speed and get in between that. Once you get exposed on the outside. So I think one is the skill level improved. I think teams focus more on attack. Said, listen, if you score 5 tries, I must score 6 tries. Maybe I can win the game. And I think also the other part where I think is changing, I think is just the amount of rucks. For example, our game against Scotland, it was one of the games where we have like the minimum rucks that we have in the past year. There was not a lot of rucks in that game, just because the ball was always in the air, in hands, playing attack, and then it's very difficult to defend. So you're not wrong. I just think maybe there's a more focus on attack, and if I can keep you out, I can keep you out. But if you score a try, I must just go back and score another try. And I think that it's a combination of a lot of things, more skillful. It became very difficult to engage with the defense now, with all these options that attacking teams and attacking players can have. And I just think you have such skillful players now to engage with that it put the defense under massive pressure. And as you see in the Six Nations rounds, the attacking team is getting the penalties. The defending team just getting penalties against him. You go backwards. But once you attacking team, you get a penalty, you can kick it out, you can attack, and they can attack. And you just create more pressure and you get yellow cards. And once you get more yellow cards, then obviously you can score more tries as well.
I want to move on briefly to the Nations Championship, which now obviously involves it's like a mini World Cup, because I mean you got the Six Nations teams, the Rugby Champions, the Sunza teams, and then Japan and Fiji. How do you guys see it? Are you guys taking it? Because I know Rassie had hinted that he might, because we've got the greatest rivalry against New Zealand, 4 tests against New Zealand, that the Springboks might make that more important or put it higher on the list of priorities. How does the French team, from the French camp, how important is the Nations Championship? Is it on par with the Six Nations, or is it just another tournament?
Again, that elephant in the room with the top 14 club owners. What happened in the past when I never understand it, and once I joined the French now, then I just realized all the club owners have so much power in French rugby. So they have a negotiation and agreement between the club owners and the French Federation where they said, listen, when it's Six Nations, you can pick the best 42 guys, and then there's no club rugby involved. Then you can have the best guys. Once there's a break of a week, you can rest that guy. The autumn series, end of the year, you can pick the best guys, and that's agreement. But in between the middle of the year, when it is the last 2 or 3 rounds of the top 14, then go into the playoffs, which is a lot of money for the club only because they play for Europe and Heineken, the old Investec Cup, whatever. And then we're not allowed to touch, let's say, we're not allowed to touch the best 28 guys or the best 32 guys. Then they have to stay with the clubs. And that would mean we always have to pick the B and the C team players, which happened last year when we visited New Zealand. So at the one side, it's a bad thing. You can't pick your strongest French team to go and compete against New Zealand, Australia, and Japan. But then on the other side, it can be a good development. You can pick your number 2, your number 3, your number 4. They can put up their hands, they can play and get opportunity. And interesting, some of the players that we played last year in New Zealand 3 test was all playing now in the Six Nations for us. So on one side, it's a good thing, but they know, I mean, let's for example say we come to South Africa now. They want to see Antoine Dupont and they want to see the Ramos. They want to see the best French team. They don't want to see a guy that they never heard the name before, or the Springboks playing today against a French team, but it's actually a third team. So I also understand that. So for us, so we're going to New Zealand, Australia, and Japan. And again, we're not allowed to touch the 32 best guys. So again, we're going with a BC team. And I also understand Rassie's decision, because the greatest rivalry for Test All Blacks here, it's a big thing for South Africa. It's a big rivalry between the All Blacks and the Springboks. And maybe I will do the same and say, listen, I will rest certain players, not to play against Ireland or England or Italy or whatever, or Scotland, and rest my best 15 or 18 guys to play against All Blacks. It's a thin line.
Yeah. Is Flox going to hang back after the mid-year tour, the Nations Championship tour, to come watch some Test rugby in South Africa?
Listen, I'm looking forward to that Test rugby. And luckily, when we back from Australia, New Zealand, then the timing is perfect to go to watch that. So I'm looking forward to that 4 Test. It'll remember the old days when I was a kid, and the Sid Goings and those type of guys was touring South Africa. You never miss a Test, and it will be a good build up, and it will be big, and it will be massive.
Awesome, Flox. Thank you very, very much for chatting to Rugby Unfiltered. It's such a pleasure to have you, and hopefully we can do this a bit more. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me on the show. Eugene, what an interesting insight into the game. I think it's so great that we have this exclusive inside the French camp. I mean, it's brilliant, brilliant insight. I think there was another very big game this weekend. Besides all the Six Nations games, there was a game at Loftus, which a lot of people, I think you predicted it. The team that turns up, and if one team turns up and the other one doesn't turn up, we're going to have an upset result. And you predicted it. The Bulls didn't turn up, and the Stormers did turn up in a big way. And there we had it. I mean, the Stormers beat the Bulls twice in one season, and on both occasions they just wanted it more than the Bulls wanted.
Yes, Jan, that was such a fascinating way to see how it all turned out. And that's why I predicted that if the Stormers on the day have belief and they start well and they can get into their rhythm, and the Bulls not, it's going to be a difficult game. And the Stormers were the underdogs in this game, so there was no pressure on them. So they opened up, and then of course the Bulls, as I thought, would go into it very conservative, but too conservatively, and take nothing away from Sasha. Again arrived at the game, and he had a big influence in the game. So by the time the Bulls really noticed, it was too late. And take your hats off to the Stormers. I thought they played an incredible good game, and they sort of showed signs that they can go all the way again. And I'm not taking anything away from Akis and the Bulls. They would have learned that will be hurting, and they will be back. So yeah, it shows you sometimes if on the day the team that arrives that wants it the most, that can disrupt the opponents and get points and keep that pressure on. It was a great game.
Eugene, you speak about the differences, and the statistics of the game actually proves what you said last week already, and about turning up and not turning up. So the important things, and I know it's a bit after the fact, and hindsight is a 20/20 science, and all that stuff. But the key facts for me is the Bulls had 17 missed tackles, 14 turnovers, 15 penalties. That tells you that there was something wrong. I know both teams had 2 yellow cards, and the Stormers, one of the Stormers' yellow cards was a bit nasty, but the reality is the Bulls, the penalty count was 15-7. And that's the issue. It tells you how disciplined and how much desire the Stormers had, whereas the Bulls were very lackluster. They weren't concentrating. They were out of sorts. And the other thing is the Stormers kicked 30 times, the Bulls just 20 times. That means the Bulls played the wrong tactics. The Stormers knew that they were going to kick the Bulls into their half and put pressure on there. And that's where it comes in what you said about Sasha. He played under instructions. It's unlike Sasha's normal game because he likes to be loose and fast and expansive. But he was very controlled. I mean, he passed when he had to pass. He only kicked when he had to kick. And his kicking was far more accurate than the Bulls kickers. And I think also Emrys Papier's withdrawal early on Saturday morning because of his wife giving birth. That impacted the Bulls because you would practice all week with a specific scrum half to do specific tactics. And suddenly the other scrum half comes in and perhaps he doesn't provide you with the same skill set as Emrys does. And I think, all those things contribute, but the biggest thing was the Bulls. It's almost like an apathy. You could see the heads drop. They started well. There was a bit of structure earlier and they looked like they could, they had a try turnover because there was a knock on and suddenly after 20 minutes, the heads dropped. And that tells me they just weren't up for this game.
Yeah, Jan, it's interesting that you talk about the Emrys Papier. I think it should not have such a big impact because both scrum halves trained with the team, both know the structure, the game plan. Missing so much tackles is out of character for the Bulls. And that to me was a worry. And that means that their urgency, their sense of urgency and return to the game or return to action, as some of the modern coaches call it, was not like always. And that's why I said earlier, it'll hurting and they'll go to the drawing board and they'll come back with a vengeance. And I'm glad for Dobbo and the team that they got their mojo and rhythm back, but now they need to keep that. Now, all you want as a coach is consistency, and that's all we can hope for now, and still support all the South African teams in the URC.
Yeah, and they don't have much time. The Bulls start on Friday night, so the Bulls and the Stormers both. Yeah, and I want to touch about the physicality intensity just now, but on Friday night the Bulls play Cardiff at home, so the Bulls are going to bounce back immediately. They don't have much time. They've got two players that are doubtful. The wing injured his foot fracture, and then Harold Foster got concussion, so he failed his HIA, so the chances are he won't play. And then Sepp de Klerk had a foot fracture. So, that will impact the Bulls again. They will need to make changes to the team. But I think the biggest change they need to make on Friday night against a very good Cardiff team is perhaps the attitude. And then obviously there's other big games. I mean, Scarlet, Zebra on Friday, Ulster Connacht on Friday. And then Saturday, we start with the Lions against Edinburgh at Ellis Park. A massive, massive game for the Lions. They still 7th. They're just ahead of the Bulls on the standings. The Bulls are 8th. So the Lions need to beat Edinburgh, and it's vital. And you can talk about that game now. And then after that, Sharks Munster in Durban. Before on Sunday, apologies, the Stormers host the Dragons. So the Stormers have got a nice, easy game. Or Dragons are not so easy anymore, but the Stormers have got a soft game. It won't be at the same high intensity as the Bulls were, but the other three South African teams are going to massive games this weekend.
Yes, Jan, I must just correct you. There's not a thing like an easy game anymore. You've now seen that easy games you can actually lose as well. I think, Harold and Sebastian is a big loss for the Bulls. Harold's been playing some of the best rugby of his career, I thought, this year. He had a big impact. So, but again, that creates an opportunity for somebody new to put up their hand and fit into the glove. I believe Friday night the Bulls are going to turn up, and it's going to be a tough day for Cardiff. The Lions Edinburgh, two South African coaches against each other. They're traveling. It's home ground. The Lions have got good momentum. Again, you cannot rest on your laurels because Sean Everett will also know the pattern that the Lions play and what they do. And his coach teams that play at Ellis Park, although the travel they have is long, I believe the Lions should win it there. Durbs is going to be tough. Munster is a good team. They on the curves up. But you know what, Jan? These home games, and any coach, if you do your planning pre-season, your home games, you must win. And sometimes you really identify a away game, which is a tough one that you can sort of lose. But home games, you should win. And I really hope that all the South African teams this weekend win their home games.
Yeah.
And Sunday, talking about the Stormers, I didn't want to elaborate on that too much because you said it's an easy game. And it's not easy. But they will build on what they did this weekend.
Yeah.
They will not fall in that trap again.
Eugene, I want to just take you back to the Lions game. The key is whether Edinburgh will have all their Scottish players available, because those guys just come out of a very tough Six Nations, and usually for the first week after the Six Nations, those players are resting. So until we see the team, we won't know exactly which team Edinburgh brings. They do have a very good team, even they've got some nice depth. But I think, if you lose a couple of really good forwards and suddenly the Lions are on song, it becomes a very, very different game, especially on a Saturday afternoon at Ellis Park. It'll be a high-paced game, and maybe after the travelling, Edinburgh might find it a bit tough. But that's the challenges that you have, is you come out of an international competition and suddenly your club has to play and you don't have all your players.
Yes, Jan. Again, coming back to Sean, he's an intelligent coach, and he will know those guys need a break. And I'm sure he's not going to use them. What he most probably could do is put some of them on the bench. But usually, after a tournament like that, you want to give the guys a total break. But as you say, let's see. Let's see it all go. It's also about how much playing time those players had for Scotland. Let's see the team, and then we can most probably talk about that. But it's going to be a great weekend of URC rugby.
I just want to touch on the Stormers game as well before we move on, because I know there's still some Varsity Cup and there's the Sevens, so we must get around to the Sevens just now as well. But turning to the Stormers, after they beat the Bulls early in January, or that other game in Cape Town, where it was also a brutal game like this past weekend, the Stormers got up for that game. And after the game, John Dobson said, you can't maintain that level of intensity week after week. And we saw that the Stormers' intensity dipped seriously after that. They went on those 4-match losing streak. One was in the Champions Cup, and the other 3 were in the URC. And they struggled. And this past weekend, they got up for the Bulls again. And I know that there are no easy games, and the Dragons will give the Stormers a run for their money. But I don't think the Dragons are as physical or as intense as a Bulls game would be, or as a Sharks game would be, those games. So those, and I think this weekend the Stormers are still okay. But after that, the Stormers go on a European, on an overseas tour, and they finish with some really tough games on the road. So that's when that issue of maintaining your intensity week after week becomes a problem again, because the Stormers already suffered some serious injuries this year. And 1 or 2 injuries, and they got trouble again, because they don't have as much depth as some of those Irish and Welsh and Scottish teams. So I think, to me, the concern for the Stormers is, can they maintain that intensity and that physicality which helped them beat the Bulls?
Yes, I agree with you. I think there's the most important point that we must mention is that it's about man management, player management. And that's a secret of getting your players, all 15 or 23, on the day, on game day, as fresh as possible, injury-free. And that's always the challenge for any coach, especially if you don't have depth. But let's not be devil's advocate and take it game by game and see what happens.
Eugene, I'm sure you've got a few more cliches in your pocket as a coach.
Yeah, no, we all have. There are certain words that you can use, but seeing that I don't coach anymore, I'll just keep them in my pocket.
I think that's a good time to move on to the Sevens. I think it would be amiss of us not to congratulate Philip Snyman and his Sevens team for winning the World Series, the league stages of the Sevens World Series. And I think that a lot of people don't even realize that this is not the end of the road. The Sevens global showpiece has been broken up into 2 parts. Last year they had the league phases, and then the top 8 teams went into the season-ending tournament in North America, where the Blitzboks won. They barely scraped into the top 8, and then won in America, and they became the world champions. That title they're now going to defend. So now they've won the league stages with their win over Fiji in New York at the weekend. So they now have to go into 3 more tournaments. And they're playing. It starts with Hong Kong next month. And we know that the Blitzboks always struggle in Hong Kong. They've never won in Hong Kong. So there's history there, and maybe this team is the team that's got enough Momentum. Then they go to Valley de Lloyd, the Valley de Lloyd. It's a Spanish city where they're going to play the round 2 of the champions, the Sevens Championship, and then Bordeaux in France in June. So those 3 tournaments now, almost like a league stage, and the top team then wins the championship. So the Blitzboks have got 3 more tournaments to defend their world championship title.
Yes, Jan, I must also congratulate Philip. He's got it right with the right mix. And don't take anything away from Impie Visser, the captain, and the team itself. This team is building a wonderful character within themselves. Now, I'll take my hats off because I thought their defense throughout the whole tournament was phenomenal, and defense beat them in that final. I mean, the last minute, Fiji was on the attack, and the guys just kept their composure. They kept their shape, and well done. I was pretty proud. I was glad I stayed up to watch this game.
Or even if they want to watch the full game, it will be out there. It's worth watching and rewatching because those last 2 minutes with Fiji on attack, with Fiji carrying the ball, the amount of defense, the type of defense, and I don't want to harp on defense and character and attitude, but we all know, you as a coach know very well, the team's attitude is symbolized in the defense. And where the Bulls slipped a lot of tackles, which said they weren't up for the game. This Blitzboks were so up for that game. Fiji has all the skills. They have the size. I mean, those Blitzboks are minute compared to those massive Fijians. Yet they kept them out for 2 minutes to win the tournament, to win the series, because it was between the Fiji and South Africa. They were level on points, and whoever won that final would have won the series. And for 2 minutes, it was insane defense. And I think that says a lot about the character and the attitude and the pride in the jersey.
Yeah. Jan, you must not hammer the Bulls so much. We were hard on them today, missing those tackles. I'm just joking. Davi's going to smile now. 3, 2, 1. Ek wil net gou dink wat ek wou sê. Ek dink jy het dit eintlik nou mooi saamgevat. 3, 2, 1. The last thing I would like to say about the Sevens is we got speed. And I mean, we've got speed, short guys with speed, that if we break a line against Fiji, they're fast and quick and athletic. Fiji's can't catch us. So yeah, that's great. But Jan, we cannot end off our program without looking at Varsity Cup. I was at the Green Mile last night, and the wind was about 40 kilometers per hour. And the underdogs in this game was Marties, and they came and they shocked UCT. Now there were a few surprises last night. The Picker beat Takis, who was on top. The Emirates beat CUT, and a big one, UJ, after last week's hiding against UCT, beat Shimlas, who was one of the favorites. So if you go look at the standings currently, the teams that are in the running, Picker, Takis, Marties, UJ, and then who can still come in is UCT and the Shimlas from Free State. But it's very, very interesting, and a few great players starting to put up their hands in these games, and it's a pleasure to watch them.
Eugene, you said the wind was 40 kilometers an hour at the Green Mile in Cape Town. Surely that's just a breeze. I mean, by Cape Town standards, that's just a breeze.
Yeah, that the UCT players know that breeze very well that we're talking about now, and as the Marties guys found out, just putting a chip in your own 22 and rolling out behind their goal line, that breeze is pretty tough. But I'm exaggerating. 40 kilometers is a lot, but it was very, very windy, and I think all the teams that goes and play there know that they pray that the wind doesn't blow.
Yeah. Well, Eugene, it is a very interesting Varsity Cup, and as I said before, I don't watch much Varsity Cup because I'm usually busy with other things. But from the results, I'm sure it's worth turning up. And as we've seen, people still turn up for the Varsity Cup. So yeah, maybe that's a good note to finish on. Congratulations again to Marties, UJ, Picker, and Emirates. Okay, that's it from me, Jan de Koning, and my fellow host, Eugene Elof. Lofi, till next week.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, next week we have interesting discussions again.